My son got his teacher pregnant, and he denied it. Now she's demanding marriage or child support, but the DNA test results shocked everyone. I know it's unusual to spill family drama online, but I really need some perspective on the craziest situation I've ever faced. I run a few restaurants in my city. Nothing fancy on a national scale, but enough to say my family is decently well off. I'm not some tech mogul or engineer, just a business guy who found a niche in the food industry. My life was stable for the most part. I have a 19-year-old son in his first year of college. He's a chill kid, pretty shy, especially around older women, and he's never been the type to chase trouble. But somehow trouble found him in the worst possible way. It started about a month ago. My son came home looking pale and jittery. He'd normally just say hi and crash at his room, but that day he was visibly on edge. Later that evening, I heard him in a heated phone call whispering things like, "I don't know what you're talking about, and I'm not the father." That was enough to make my heart thump hard. I confronted him, and at first he dodged my questions. But eventually he came clean. A former high school teacher had contacted him, claiming she was pregnant with his baby and demanding either marriage or child support. To say I was shocked would be an understatement. My son insisted it was all nonsense, that he never slept with her or even been alone with her. I believe my kid. He's honest to a fault and definitely not the type to hook up with someone nearly a decade older, let alone a teacher. Still, hearing the word pregnant in connection with my teenager rattled me. I asked him if there was even a chance he'd done something stupid after turning 18, maybe at a party. He swore up and down, "Dad, no, it never happened." The teacher in question had subbed at his high school for a short stretch during his senior year, so the timing alone was suspicious. Plus, she was older, probably late 20s or early 30s, which made the whole scenario feel surreal. A few days later, this teacher, let's just call her teacher, showed up at our front gate. It was a Saturday morning, and I was in the kitchen sorting out restaurant receipts. My son was asleep upstairs. The doorbell rang, and there she stood, grateful, arms crossed, and wearing a furious expression. She demanded to speak to my son. I politely told her to calm down and explain what she wanted. She basically burst into a rant about how my son had ruined her life and that we had to man up and take responsibility. Then she threw out this insane demand that my son either marry her or pay a large sum in monthly support. The marriage bit floored me. It was like some twisted soap opera. I kept my cool and asked her to sit down and explain everything. She refused, just paced around my living room, throwing accusations at my son's character and calling me a liar when I said I needed proof. She claimed they had a secret relationship after he turned 18, which she framed as fully consensual. But if that were true, she'd be in trouble for hooking up with a student under her supervision. So why was she acting so brazen? The whole thing smelled like scam. Still, I told her, if she's sure my son's the father, we'll do a paternity test. She shot back that she wouldn't trust any test I arranged, accusing me of being wealthy enough to buy off the lab technicians. The paranoia in her eyes was unreal. She threatened that if we didn't cooperate, she'd take us to court, go public with the story, and ruin my son's reputation. She framed it like we had no other choice but to cave in and do everything she wanted. As soon as she stormed out of my house, I got on the phone with a lawyer I knew. He said we should absolutely demand a DNA test and keep records of every interaction we had with teacher from now on. Legal battles can get messy, but we needed to protect ourselves. My wife, my son's mother, was livid when she found out she's usually the level-headed one, but was ready to show up at teacher's door and unleash hell. I managed to calm her down by explaining we needed to do this by the book. Meanwhile, teacher kept blowing up my phone with messages, alternating between demands and threats. Sometimes she acted like we could solve it amicably if I just paid her off. Other times, she insisted she wanted a wedding immediately, as if that made any sense. She said she was around 5 months pregnant, which made her timeline even weirder. She claimed the baby was definitely my son's, but her story about when they supposedly hooked up kept shifting. At this point, my biggest worry was that the courts might take her claims seriously without a test or that she'd spread rumors before we could clear my son's name. He was just starting college. A scandal like this could mess up his future. I could already imagine the whispers on campus. That's the dude who got his teacher pregnant. It made me sick. I contacted the principal of my son's former high school, someone I'd done business with before, and explained this bizarre situation while asking for any documentation on teacher's schedule when she subbed there. He agreed to help by providing official records showing which classes she actually covered. And when it turns out she barely taught at that school, maybe 6 weeks total. And from those logs, she was never even assigned to my son's classes. That was a relief, but didn't completely rule out the possibility of an after-school encounter, which is what she was claiming. Digging deeper, my son's friend came forward saying there was no way my son hooked up with her during the weekend. She insisted the affair happened because he was out of town at a soccer tournament. My son was a pretty decent midfielder back in high school. There were photos, social media tags, and all sorts of evidence placing him in another state at that time. The more we pieced together, the more obvious it became that her story was full of holes. After some intense back and forth through our respective lawyers, we managed to schedule a paternity test. My lawyer insisted on using a reputable lab selected through the court to avoid any bribery. Nonsense. Teacher kept complaining about it, still dropping hints that a big fat check could make everything go away. I refused. My son started looking haunted by the whole ordeal. Dark circles under his eyes, constant checking of his phone. It killed me to see him so stressed out. But I told him, we're going to fight this, and we'll prove you're innocent. He nodded, looking both scared and relieved. As we got to the lab on Thursday morning, teacher was already there, arms folded, glaring daggers at my son. She refused to even speak to him, just kept muttering about how she was the victim. The nurses took samples from both of them. Then we had to wait 1 or 2 weeks for the results. That waiting period felt like an eternity. My son tried to keep busy with school and his part-time shifts at my restaurant, but I could see worry on his face as he kept asking me, "Dad, you believe me, right?" I'd reassure him every time. Yes, 100%. Teacher didn't let up. She texted or called daily with new threats, saying she'd tell local news stations about how we were covering up a scandal. She even threatened to stand outside my restaurant with a sign reading "Deadbeat Dad." The gall of this woman was unbelievable. I saved every message and gave them to my lawyer. He was practically salivating over how strong our defamation case was becoming. Then one random evening, I got a call from an unknown number. A man's voice started yelling, "Stop destroying teacher's life. You'll regret it if you don't pay up." When I asked who the hell he was, he just cursed at me and hung up. It didn't scare me, but it pissed me off. She was clearly trying to recruit random people to put more pressure on us. My wife wanted to file a police report immediately, but my lawyer suggested waiting until paternity results came in so we could have solid grounds for pressing charges for harassment or extortion. The day the paternity test results came back was the most surreal of my life. From the start, I was absolutely certain of my son's innocence. We had proof, testimonies, records showing that he couldn't have even been with that woman. And yet, when my lawyer called me with a serious tone and asked me to come to his office, I felt a chill run down my spine. Something was wrong. When I arrived, my son was already there, sitting in the chair, pale and trembling. My wife was next to him, arms crossed, breathing heavily, as if holding back her fury. The lawyer was serious, with the documents spread out on the table. He pushed the envelope toward me and, with a look I couldn't decipher, simply said, "The tests confirm that he is the father." My mind froze. I picked up the papers, read the numbers, the probabilities, the undeniable conclusion, confirmed compatibility. Probability of paternity, 99.99%. I looked at my son, waiting for him to scream, to say there was a mistake, to deny everything. But he just lowered his head and rubbed his hands nervously. "Son." My voice came out quieter than I expected. He stayed silent, eyes fixed on the floor. My wife lost patience first. "Say something. You spent a whole month swearing that woman was lying." He cleared his throat, voice shaky. "I didn't think it was possible." "What do you mean you didn't think it was possible?" I felt rage boiling inside me. He took a deep breath, closed his eyes and blurted out, "It was a Tinder hookup." The silence in the room was deafening. My heart pounded. My eyes widened. I felt my blood pressure rise. My wife held her breath, like she was about to explode. The lawyer just closed his eyes and rubbed his temple. "And what?" My voice came out tense, filled with disbelief. "I met her on Tinder during my senior year of high school. I didn't know she was a substitute teacher. We only found out later. She messaged me. We talked, we made plans to meet. It happened. But it was just once." My head was spinning. All this time, all these threats, all the public humiliation, all the stress he put us through. And in the end, he was the father? So you kept quiet this whole time. You let us go through this hell, spend money on lawyers, lose sleep, and you knew there was at least a chance. I really didn't think it was possible. It was only once, and I slammed my hand on the table, cutting off his pathetic excuse. You are irresponsible, boy. My voice thundered through the room. You don't know what it means to be a man. You thought you could play around and walk away clean? You thought you could just hide the truth and hope everything blew over. He shrank in his seat, visibly ashamed. But I wasn't going to go easy on him. You deserve every second of this mess we're in. You deserve to be sued. You deserve to pay every last cent of that child support. And if the law decides you should go to jail, then so be it, because you need to learn that your actions have consequences. My wife was just as furious as I was. She threw the papers in his face. You're an idiot. You made us go through humiliation, exposed us, made us fight with this woman, call her a liar, and now we have to deal with this. My son started crying, mumbling apologies, but to me, they meant nothing. The teacher's lawyer filed a lawsuit against us the following week. She claimed humiliation, emotional distress, defamation, and, of course, demanded child support. Not only that, but she insisted the baby needed an involved father. We went to court, and seeing that woman sitting there, crying in front of the judge, was unbearable. My son, silent, sitting next to me, looked like a ghost. The judge reviewed the documents, listened to both sides, and, as expected, ruled in her favor. He would have to pay child support. As we walked out of the courtroom, my wife was still furious, her eyes burning with rage. My son didn't say a word, but I looked at him and said, without an ounce of pity, I hope you've learned your lesson. And now, own up to your mistakes, because I'm not saving you from anything ever again. Paying the lawsuit was one of the most humiliating moments of my life. My wife, my lawyer, and I sat down to go over the finances, calculate the damages, and make sure every cent came from the real culprit, my son. Because if he was old enough to lie, to hide the truth, and act like an irresponsible child, then he was old enough to face the consequences. The first thing we did was open an account in his name and transfer the money we had to pay to the teacher and her lawyer. He tried to argue, saying he didn't have the money, that he was too young to handle such a debt. But I wasn't interested in excuses. If you're old enough to make a child, then you're old enough to take care of one. He kept insisting that he was in college, that he couldn't pay for everything alone. But my wife was just as firm as I was. You didn't think about that when you were having fun? Well, now you have to deal with it. We put him to work in one of my restaurants. No comfortable part-time shifts. He worked the hardest hours, with no privileges, no excuses. He washed dishes, cleaned bathrooms, served tables, and dealt with rude customers. If he wanted to eat, he had to pay for it. If he needed something, he had to figure it out. He had a family to support now. And every time he complained, every time he said it was unfair, all I had to do was remind him of my humiliation. Unfair? Unfair. I exploded one day when he dared to complain. You put me through the biggest disgrace of my life. You made your mother cry. You got us sued, humiliated, dragged to court like criminals. And now you want to talk about unfairness. He lowered his head, but that didn't calm me down. You lied to my face, made us believe that woman was a liar. We fought her, hired lawyers, completely destroyed her credibility. And in the end, who was wrong? You. Who betrayed my trust? You. He didn't respond. He never did. And that was for the best. At first, he still tried to escape responsibility. He tried to delay child support payments, claiming he couldn't save money, that it was too hard to live like this. But every time he tried to weasel out, my wife and I were there to remind him of reality. If you don't pay, you go to jail. Simple as that. He learned quickly that the world has no pity. What hurt me the most wasn't the money. I had money. It was what it represented. The fact that I had trusted him 100%. I had defended him, looked my lawyer, the judge, my friends, and my neighbors in the eyes and said, with absolute certainty, that my son had done nothing wrong. And it was all a lie. Worse than a punch. Worse than betrayal. Worse than taking a bullet. Because at least a bullet is quick. This was a slow cut, a wound that would never heal. I spent nights staring at the ceiling, trying to figure out where I went wrong. How did a son raised in a stable home, with present parents, with values, manage to lie straight to our faces and destroy everything? My wife tried to reassure me, saying he was learning, that he was growing up. But I saw the same disappointment in her eyes. He was now paying child support, working, studying, but there was no more love between us. I saw a boy who had been forced to grow up the worst way possible. And one day, When I walked into the restaurant and saw my son talking rudely to a waitress, I knew he still hadn't learned anything. He was speaking loudly, impatiently, like he was above her. Hey, my voice cut through the room. He turned around, and everyone in the restaurant stopped what they were doing. How are you talking to her? I crossed my arms. Dad, I was just... Shut up. My voice echoed through the room. He froze. I walked up to him, standing face to face. You've already ruined one woman's life. You've already made a woman cry, suffer, see you. Do you think that gives you the right to be an asshole to others now? He turned red, looked down. You are going to learn to respect women. You're going to learn how to talk properly, how to behave. Because if I ever catch you treating a woman like trash again, I swear to God, you will regret it. He nodded, swallowing his shame. He was changing now, but not because he wanted to. It was because he knew that if he messed up one more time, he would lose everything. In the end, I never fully regained my trust in him. My son had learned a lesson, but me. I learned that trusting blindly can be the worst mistake of all.